Today we're going to take a look at building the box or the case of the project. We have this example here. It's a project that's finished already, but we're looking at the back side of it here, and this is what our case or box is going to look like. We're going to have two sides of our project. We're going to have a bottom piece, and we're going to have two pieces on top that are called cleats. And if we take a look underneath here, the cleats are about 3-inch wide strips that are there to give the box some structure, as well as give us something to screw down a solid top to. So we're going to go ahead and get our pieces ready so we can start building this box or case of the project. So we're back here at our example set of plans, and if we flip through our plans, we should see some information about our project and the box that we're trying to build. So this is face frame information. Here's the side piece that gives us a different look there. Here's the back view, and this is going to show some of our joinery, and this will be helpful when we get going in a little bit. But we're looking for our plywood view, and that plywood view is going to be a map for us, and that map is going to allow us to see all the pieces we need to cut out. So this is an example set of plywood view here, and I have my plywood drawn on a half a sheet. So I've got this part blocked off, and I can see all my pieces here that I need to create and how big they are. So I have my two sides, I have a bottom piece, and two cleats that we need to make. The other four pieces on here are for the drawer box. And so right now I'm not worried about the drawer box. I'm going to focus on building my cabinet or the box. And so we're going to go ahead and get a sheet of plywood, and we're going to get this cut to our pieces. Now we may go to the wood rack and there may not be any half pieces, and so we may have to cut down a sheet in half for us to start cutting out all these individual pieces. So let's go get a piece of wood. So we're over here at our wood rack. This is where we go to get our material. Now this is where all of our oak material is stored. So on the bottom we have our 3/4 inch oak plywood. On this little middle shelf here is our 1/4 inch oak plywood. And then this red stuff you see here, that's going to be our solid oak wood for the project. Now there is some other stuff we typically keep on hand. You can see the top shelf also has some blue wood, and that's going to be our hickory. So I get a lot of students that want to build with different materials, so I keep a few different ones on hand. But for the majority of the part, we're going to be using the oak plywood for the class. And so you would come over and pick out a sheet of oak plywood. If there's already a half in there, then you can go ahead and use that half, or we may need to pull out a whole sheet and cut that in half. So let's see what this top one is here. Because my plan showed us that we only need a half a sheet, I'm going to take this piece of plywood to our saw, and we're going to cut it in half. Now we're going to cut it in half, and if we cannot get it in half exactly, you need to take the smaller half. That way we don't leave somebody else with a short piece of plywood as they're building their projects. So we're going to take this to our sliding table saw, and we're going to cut this to 48 inches wide. All right, I've got my piece of wood set up here on our sliding table saw. I've got it over here on the sliding arm. We've got our corresponding fence set down there. That is a stop set at 48 inches, and we're going to cut this piece in half. So the first thing we're going to do is turn the machine on, and because of this big piece, we're going to have to come around to the front of the machine. And this time we do want to make sure our little scoring blade is also turned on the bottom of the machine, or on the front of the machine. It's going to score the bottom side of the plywood to help us get less chips on the bottom side. So we want to make sure we turn that on. So as we turn this machine on, we're going to quarter turn the red button out. We're going to turn this knob forward. We'll turn the machine on, let it get to full speed. We'll flip it back to the full power, and then turn on the little blade in front. I'm going to use this handle to hold on to the sled and this side to push forward. We still need to push and pull at the same time. So when I'm pushing on my workpiece to keep it tight to the fence. I'm holding this back handle here so I can push and pull those together. I can control how fast the sled is moving or the arm is moving, and I can push forward to keep my material tight against the fence. So now we've got these cut in half. We're going to measure the two, and we're going to take the smaller half so that we don't leave somebody short on material. So we have our two boards cut in half. We're going to put the half that we're not using back in the wood rack, and that way another student can use that for their project. And then we're going to go to the logbook and we're going to write down the size of the piece that we're going to keep. So this is going to be my half here. I'm going to take some measurements of it so we can get it entered in the logbook. So if I measure here, I'm right about 48 inches. And if I measure this way, I'm about 48 and a half. So typically our sheets come oversized a little bit, so we can cut them in half and still get two 48-inch pieces out of there. So 48 and a half wide by 48 inches long. We'll go put that in the logbook. So this is our computer that has our logbook on here. In the middle of the screen, you'll find the words logbook, and if you click on those, it's going to open up our logbook so you can enter in your materials. And as this opens up, it's going to ask for your username and password. Your username is your first and last name with a space in between as described in the upper left corner here, and the capital letter on your first initial on your first and last name. And your password is the assigned locker combination for here in the classroom. Once you get in, you should be able to enter this piece of wood into the sheet goods section of the logbook. So we're here at the table saw. We're getting ready to cut our work pieces out of this sheet of plywood. And we're going to take a look at our plans here. Now our plans are specifically designed for this project we're building. And we can see right here, if we cut a strip of plywood out of here, that would get us our side and our bottom. We can get one strip here and another strip right here, and that will get us most of the pieces of the project. So we're using this not only as our plans, but as a map to make sure our grain gets cut the right way. A little difficult to see on this plans, but there are some light colored wood grain showing us the direction that the grain should travel on each one of these pieces so that we get their orientation right. When we're done building the project, everything fits together with the grain running the right direction. So we're going to come up to the table saw. We're going to set the fence to 11 1/8, and we're going to cut two strips, one right here and one right here. And then we'll have this extra for making our drawers or any other mistakes that we may have. So we're here at the saw. We're going to set the cursor. Remember that little red line on the table saw is accurate on our regular ripping saw here. And as I line that up, we're at 11 1/8. I'm going to lock my handle down into place, and after I lock it, I'm going to just double check that my size has not moved on me when that fence has straightened up and locked down. So now we're going to take our sheet and set it up here and get that cut. With a large sheet like this, you may need somebody to help you feed this into the table saw. And so if you're going to have help, usually the operator stands on the back side of the saw, and somebody could be over here supporting your extra piece so that it doesn't fall off the table and that it stays tight. The person who's supporting the workpiece over here, if they're pushing tight to the fence, they should only be doing that behind the blade here. Okay, once we get to the blade, we no longer want to push over, because then this piece will hit the blade and we could pinch it. So really the person over here is mainly holding it tight and right up here helping to keep that tight against the fence. always in front of the blade or before the blade, never once it gets past the blade. You could also have somebody down on the end helping to catch that as it comes off the feed roller. Now, if you don't have much experience in cutting large sheets, then you may want to get that help. If you're comfortable cutting a large sheet by yourself, then you can cut that on your own. I find it easiest when I'm starting to cut to hold the workpiece in this far corner from the fence. Then I can kind of control it a little bit better and get it tight. Then once I get up closer to the blade, I will move over here and finish the cut. So let's go ahead and get the machine turned on. Now I turn the table saw off because I need to go around and get that piece out of there. If I had somebody catching for me, they could move that off the table for me. But since I'm not, I'm leaving the operator's position, I want to shut the machine down. And then we're ready to cut our second piece. We'll turn the saw back on. And again, we're shutting off the saw when we go around to get our workpiece. Per our plans here, and as they dictate, we cut 2 strips at 11 1/8, which we have right there. And then we have this extra piece, which is represented right here on our plans. So now we're going to take and get these cut to size by cutting them right to the finished length, which is going to be 28 inches according to the plan. Now, when it comes to sheet goods, we typically are not doing a rough cut. The rough cut is only for the face or for the solid lumber. And that's because it comes in with a not straight edge or with rough edges. The plywood typically comes in with a straight edge that from the factory that we can count on and trust to be straight. So that's why we're not doing rough cuts with the plywood. So we're back here at the sliding table saw. We're going to set the fence here on the arm to 28 inches. We're going to cut a little bit off the end of the board. That gets us a square cut. And then we're going to flip it over and take the rest off. So let's get this fence set. So I got 28 inches. I'll move my board over so I can get the machine started. And again, we're going to have the knob forward, quarter turn the red button. We're going to turn the blade on. When it gets to full speed, we're going to turn it back and turn on the small saw blade so that it can score the underside so we don't chip as much. So I've got 2 examples here for you. The first one here was cut without using the scoring blade on the bottom side. And you can see how when the saw blade comes through, it chips out that workpiece a little bit, so the veneer is chipped out. So the cut is not as clean as it is with the scoring blade. Now let's take a look at this one that was done with the scoring blade, and we have a much cleaner cut. There's still a couple little chips, but not nearly as bad as without the scoring blade. So as we put those 2 side by side and examine, no scoring blade, and this one had the scoring blade. So make sure on your plywood pieces, veneer or melamine or laminate, that we are using that scoring blade to help with our chips. So we just got done cutting our first piece. Now we're going to cut our second piece the same process. We're going to take a little bit off of one end, flip it over, then cut the rest off so that both ends are square to the side that's against the fence. So again, turn on that scoring blade to help with chips. So we'll slide that over so we can turn the machine on. We'll quarter turn the red button so it can pop out. We'll put that knob forward and turn the machine on. Now we'll turn it back and turn the score blade on. All right, now that we're done, we've got our two pieces cut to 28 inches long, and we have our two scrap pieces left over, and those are going to end up being some parts for our project. So our two 28 pieces are here, and then what those other two are going to be left over for is for the bottom of the project and the two cleats. Before we can cut these to length, though, we're going to need to cut our dados and rabbets into these two side pieces. So let's go over to the dado blade and start getting that set up. So if you come up to the dado blade and it's set up for somebody else's use, which it probably will be, you may need to do some changing. You're definitely going to need to change the fence, and you're going to need to check the blade height. But right now this blade is not set up for our needs. We want this blade to be 3/4 of an inch wide, and right now it's set up for 1 inch wide, or sorry, 1/4 inch wide. So now we need to change the blade. And in order to do that, we're going to pull out this little thumb indicator, this finger indicator here, and pull that up, and then the throat plate will come out. Then inside the machine, we're going to need to open this little door. Once that door is open, we have a little bit more access to the nut and to the arbor so we can get that changed. Anytime you're changing the blade or touching the knives on a machine, you need to have the machine power disconnected from the power source. So we're going to need to get the wrenches and the dado blade sets out to change this to a bigger size, and we're going to do that over here on the left side of the table. Typically our wrenches hang right up underneath here, and they would hang for your convenience. And then usually there's a little black box sitting here. This is our dado blade or our dado head, and we're going to use this to change the blade out. So as we open up our box, okay, typically in here is some instructions to set this to the right thickness, and it gives you the size of blades that you want or need for each cutter or chipper, and the setup you would need for each size. Typically when we're using this, we put these blades back so that we can find the set that we took off last. So as I unstack these, and you'll notice that each one is a different way so that the teeth aren't touching, I can unstack these and see which teeth go on, and you can see there's some spacers right there that tell me that these are the blades that I typically use for our 3/4 dados and rabbets. So we're going to close this box up, we're going to set these up and verify that this is the right size, and then we'll go from there. When I set the blades down, I want to make sure I'm not setting them on the steel tabletop. We don't want the carbide teeth touching the metal top. And so I've set them on a piece of wood for now so that those teeth cannot get damaged from scratching against the metal. And then we can put the dado blade back underneath the saw. All right, we're looking down into the saw. I've already opened the little door down here, so that's out of the way. We're going to take one of our wrenches here, and we're going to put that open end on the arbor, which is on this side of the blade. And I'm going to turn the blade until that locks in. And again, the power needs to be disconnected when touching the blades or knives. We're going to take our other wrench, and this time we're going to put the closed end or box end on the nut, and I'm going to get that lined up and then go ahead and loosen them. I'm going to take this nut off now that it's loose by hand, and I'm going to make sure I don't drop it down into the dust system or down into the bottom of the saw. Oftentimes there's sawdust in the bottom of the saw and it becomes difficult to find, or we have to dig our hand through the dust system to find the nut. So I'm going to I like to reach around like this and use my hand, and I should be easy to do with no wrenches on there, and then my hand's underneath, so if I drop it then hopefully it lands into my hand and not down into the dust system. So I'm going to get the nut out of there, and now I'm going to take off the blade. Now I just need to take off one of these, and then the chipper blades are going to go on in between these two silver ones. So I'm going to take off the outside blade and set that on my pieces of wood so they're not hitting the metal table. And now I'm going to start putting on the chippers. And these teeth, as I look at it like this, on the top side towards me is where that sharp edge should be, or the lead edge of the blade. So I'm going to put those on. As I put them on, I want to stagger the teeth so that the teeth are in between each other, like this right here. I don't want to have it so my teeth, the carbide teeth, are touching each other, because that is going to cause the teeth to compress against each other and possibly crack or shatter. And so I want to set them in between each other so my teeth are all offset. Then we're going to go ahead and put the next one on, making sure that that blade sharp lead edge is on the top facing me here. And I put that on, and I'm going to move that one a little bit different. So that chipper is now, teeth are down there where the second one was way up here. So we're kind of offsetting them. Put the third one in here. So that's the last of our chippers. Now our outside blade goes back on, and we're gonna just slide that in there, try not to hit the teeth on anything. And now all of my teeth should be staggered in between each other. We'll take a closer look at that in a minute. I'm gonna start getting my nut put back on here, and I'm gonna reach down like I did before, so if I drop it, it lands in my hand. And then I'm gonna start just finger tight getting that on. It should go on nice and easy if it's going on straight. And now we're gonna take a closer look at those blades and see what we're talking about there. All right, if we take a closer look at these teeth, what we mean by offsetting them is we want them to be so that like this tooth here is not touching this tooth here, that they're in between each other, that they're not going to crush against each other as we put them on. So by staggering them, the pad, which is usually wider than the body, that pad or tooth blade there is not going to hit the next one next to it because they're offset from each other. They're staggered. All right, we got our nut put back on. Now we're going to take our wrenches and get them back on there and tighten this blade up. It doesn't need to be super tight, but it does need to be snug so it doesn't come loose. Now, when you're tightening this, some of these teeth may slide around a little bit, and that's fine if they slide right up next to one another, as long as the pad or the tooth is not touching the next tooth over. Okay, if it's just in front or behind, that's okay, but as long as they're not sitting side by side crushed against each other. When we're done, we're going to take our wrenches out and put them back underneath the saw, and we're going to close this little door here for dust management, and we're going to put the throat plate back in the machine. So this is our throat plate that was in there. Now this has a 0 clearance for a 1/4 inch blade. So this throat plate's not going to work for our application today. We're going to need to find the one that has the bigger cutout for the 3/4 clearance on our Dados and Rabbits. We're going to install this with this tip into the table. So that's going to go into the machine first and then lift up on this handle, and it should sit nice and flush around there, and then we can lock it down into place with that metal rod. This other throat plate can get set aside, give it to your instructor so they can put it away for the time being. So as I'm getting ready to set my height, I'm going to take and make a mark on my board, and typically our rabbets are about half the thickness of the board, unless there's some reason where you have rabbets on both sides. So I'm going to make a mark at 3/8 because we're working with 3/4 material. And now I've got a little pencil mark there that I can use in setting up my saw blade. Now I can take my piece that has my pencil mark, and I can hold that next to the saw blade and watch the teeth as I raise or lower it to get it to the right spot. Now remember, when you're raising and lowering the blade in the operator's position right down to the right of the on-off switch, this is the handle that you use to raise and lower the blade. So let's get in here and fine-tune this to the right size. So I have 2 pencil marks here. I'm going to use the one closest to the edge of the board here, and I'm going to raise and lower the blade till I get it to the right height. And I'm just looking at the outside edge of this tooth right on the very side against my line here, and that's how I'm going to set it to the right size. And again, as a visual reference, we should be half the thickness of the board as we're setting this up. So the other way to check for the blade heightness is to take our tape measure and put it down right on the throat here, the throat plate, and I'm looking at the tooth at the highest point as it turns to make sure that we're right at 3/8 of an inch. Now if you remember, 3/8 is half the thickness, and so that's where we want to be on our height. Now anytime you're changing or setting the blade height and your hands are closer than 4 inches to the blade, the power needs to be disconnected from the machine so that we don't accidentally get it turned on and our hands are close. So I've got my blade height set. We're going to run a test piece on a scrap piece of wood to make sure not only the blade is set the right height, but the width of the dado is the right width as well. We need to make sure the guard's in place, so pull that over the blade and get that positioned and locked into place. And then it doesn't matter where right now, but we're just running a dado in the workpiece, and we're going to run this through. So here's our dado that we just cut. We can measure the amount of material that's left over or the amount of material that's been removed to figure out if we're in the right location for our dado blade height. Now the other thing we want to check is the width of the dado to make sure it's correct. And we're going to take one of our pieces and slide it into that joint, and it should be a nice tight fit. We shouldn't have to hammer it in because it's too tight, and it shouldn't be too sloppy in there. So that looks like a nice good fit for what we're doing. So that will be a correct size. So I'm back here at the plans, and we're going to take a look at what we actually need to cut on the dado and rabbet. So this would be a back view of our project. And right down here we can see that we need to cut a dado into the side of the board at 4 7/16 from the floor to the top edge of that shelf. And up here on the top, we also need to cut a rabbet that is 3/4 of an inch from the edge of the board. So we can set that up, and there's a couple ways we can do that. For the rabbet, one way we could do that is to take our tape measure against the fence. Of course, the power is turned off. Take the tape measure against the fence and slide it over until we get the right measurement. Another thing we could do is take our thickness of our wood like this and stand it up on edge and line that up to the nearest tooth as I feel for flushness of that tooth down there. That would help me indicate the right size. Ultimately, what we're going to do is run a test piece first to make sure it's set right where we need it, so that our rabbet is not sloppy on the project. So get the guard in place, set it down where it needs to be, and now we're going to run our rabbet. Anytime we're checking anything on our projects, our cuts, or if something's set right, we want to make sure the machine is shut off so something doesn't accidentally engage the blade as we're checking our sizes. What we're looking for is a nice tight fit. As I put this rabbet together and I've got a tight fit in the joint, what I'm looking for is flushness right here on the outside of the project. I would not want a step or a lip on either side of the project. I want it to be nice and flush. Now right now I would say that the rabbet could be just slightly bigger. There's ever so slightly a little bump on our good piece here. So the rabbet needs to be a little bit bigger. We'll set it a little bit bigger and run another test piece. So this is where our cursor comes into play on this machine. It's not accurate, but we leave it here so we can fine tune the machine. I know I need to move just ever so slightly bigger, and by leaving this cursor here, I can watch that red line on the tape measure to make sure I get it set just a little bit bigger, not too much. We've got the machine set up for what we need. Now we need to determine which side is going where. So we're going to look at the plywood and look here. I can see that there's a splice in my veneer and I've got kind of two different colors. So this side is likely going to be the inside of my cabinet. If I flip it over, this side looks much better. I don't see any splices in the veneer. I just see nice uniform grain. So this is going to be my good side, which is going to be visible to me as I cut. Now the other thing we need to look for is any chips along the line of the project, or on the edge of the project. If I look close, there's no chips on this side. Down here there are some little chips. And so the rabbet, if we look at our plans, the rabbet is on top of the project. And if we're running our rabbet first, anything on top of the project is going to be seen. Things on the bottom of the project are not going to be seen because trim is going to cover it up. So these chips I see down here, I want that towards the bottom of the project. And so that means that's going to be done with our dado. So this means I want my rabbet, I want the nice clean edge up here along the fence. And once you have that determined, you can go ahead and run it. So now if we look at our piece, we have our rabbet cut on the end. Now we need to get our other piece and do the same thing. Again, we're verifying wood grain. I don't see any splices here. Let's look at the other side. I can see a slight splice in the plywood here where these grains are coming together in a point shape. It depends on what you want on your project. That veneer splice doesn't look too bad. The color is a little bit more uniform. This side, I don't like this as much because it's got wider grain patterns, but really it's a personal preference if you want to see that splice or if you want to see the grain patterns. I'll probably put the big wide grains up even though I don't like that as much. And then again, the other thing we're looking for is chips on our plywood. This one looks nice and clean. This one down here has the chips, so that's going to be against the floor. So we'll go ahead and turn this on and run it. So now both of my pieces have the rabbet cut in the end. Now we need to cut the dado. If we look at our plans are 4 7/16 to the top of that shelf. On our face frame, we made the face frame 4.5. This is going to give us a 1/16 of an inch lip when we're done that we can router off. If we try to make the face frame and the plywood exactly the same size, we have a chance that we could see some of those plywood layers if we don't get everything lined up right. So we're giving ourselves a 1/16 of an inch. We're dropping the shelf lower so that the face frame sticks up 1/16 of an inch. So now we're going to get this saw set for that. I'm going to lift the guard up out of the way. I'm going to turn the machine off because I'm going to be touching or be close to the blade. And now I'm going to take my tape measure along the fence and I'm going to line it up to the tooth with the saw. So I'm going to be measuring from the fence here to the far tooth of the blade, and the reason we know that is because if we look at the plans here, we're at 4 7/16 from the fence, and if this is our dado blade, we want to be to the far edge of the dado blade. So our plans are telling us the size and to which blade to measure. So I'm going to use that as a guide, and I'm going to come in here, and I should be 4 7/16 to the far tooth from the fence. So I'm going to line up the edge tooth here with my 4 7/16. And as I clamp the handle, I'm going to verify that it didn't move on me. Try that a couple times if you need to get it just right locked in. Okay, that looks like it's in a good spot for us. From the fence to this very far outside tooth is 4 7/16. So now we're going to go ahead and run our dados. Now that we got the blade height set and the fence set, we're going to pull the guard down and get that locked in place. And now we're going to run our dados. So if we look at our board, the dado is going to go opposite the end of the rabbet. So the rabbet's here, our dado is going to go over here on this edge. So we're going to lay the good side up towards us, and we're going to run this through. So if we want to verify our size, we can take our tape measure and measure from the fence to the far tooth of the blade, and we should be at 4 7/16. So now I've got my other board ready. I've got my rabbet down here. My dado needs to go here as well, so we're going to run that. Now we have our two sides created. We have our dados in the bottom, our rabbets up on the top edge, and now we need to determine how wide the shelf needs to be that fits between here to keep the box in its correct shape. So if we look at our plans, it's going to tell us that our project needs to finish at 12 inches wide. So we're going to take 12 inches, and then we need to figure out how much fits between here. And the best or easiest way is to put these boards back to back and then measure the amount of distance that's left over. So 12 minus 5/8 is going to be 11 3/8. That's how long our pieces on top and bottom need to be. So we're going to go ahead and go cut those. All right, we're here at our sliding table saw. I have my bottom shelf and I have my two cleats that are 3 inches wide. And we're going to cut these to 11 3/8 to give the box its correct structure. So we're going to cut a little off one side, then flip them over and take the rest off like we typically do with our pieces to get them square on both ends. So now at this time we're going to take all three of these pieces and go do a dry fit or a dry assembly and make sure everything is the right size. So I've got my pieces, I've got my shelf cut, and I'm going to slide that into place here. and I should be able to do a dry fit and have that be the right size. So I've got my box together without any glue, and I'm going to take my tape measure and measure. We want to be right at 12 inches, and it looks like that's where we're at. Now I could align the top as well, but I know that everything was cut one right after the other. All three of my pieces going across were cut one right after the other. My sides are cut one right after the other, so I know everything's the right size. So if it's good here, it should be good up on the top. If you didn't cut all your pieces at the same time, maybe you cut your bottom pieces and forgot about your cleats, and then later you cut your cleats, then yes, you would maybe want to verify that each of them are exactly the same length and are correct. So after doing a dry fit, what we're going to do now is we're going to create a groove or a channel for our backing to slide into. And we can see that illustrated on our project plans here. If we look close, there's a 1/4 inch groove that's a 1/2 inch in from the edge, so the backing can slide down into the project. And to show you a little bit better what that is, let's take a look at this example. So here at our example nightstand, we can take a look. On the back side of the project, there is a groove that goes all the way around the project, and this is to allow the backing to slide in. Now the backing is going to stop at the shelf, and that's going to help us as we drag the project around the room when we're moving furniture around, that there's not a little 1/4 inch piece vibrating around and flapping around. So you could have it go all the way to the bottom if you need to. We would have to cut this shelf shorter. But on our example for now, we're just going to have it fit right here on the bottom. So before we put the groove in, we need to make sure at this point that we're creating a right and a left side of the project. If we at this point don't orientate these right, we could end up with two pieces that are the same if we put the grooves on the wrong sides. So when I have it set up like this, I'm going to take the shelf out for now. And I'm going to slide these two together so I make sure that I have a right and a left. And I'm just going to put an X on one side, and that's going to help me orientate that against the fence so I get that set up right. If I were to have these set up the same way and an X on both of these, I would be making two left sides of the cabinet. And so we want to make sure we're not doing that. We want to make sure that we're making one of each of them. So that's where those X's I made are going to come into play. All right, we're going to use the router table to put this dado into our project. And so we're going to set the machine up with the 1/4 inch spiral cut bit on here. We've got the bit in here installed, ready to go. A couple parameters we need to check though is that the blade is set to the right height. And so we're going to do that by taking our rabbet that we've already created, and we're going to put this up underneath the bit and make sure that it's the same size. So if we lay this flat on the table and come down here next to the blade, that blade should be the same height as our other rabbet that we made. So that looks like it's pretty close to the right size there. The blade is just scraping my rabbet that I have cut on this board. So this rabbet is setting up along that blade, and it's right. Okay, so you want to check the height. Again, don't ever assume any machine is set up for what you need. If somebody were up here and set this up for you, you would want to check and make sure the blade is in tight so it doesn't work itself loose. What could happen is if you don't check that, this blade could work itself loose, and as you're cutting your plywood, that blade can start to cut and start coming through our good side of our veneer. So we want to make sure we check and make sure it's tight. We want to make sure the blade height is checked and the distance from the fence. So according to the plans, we should have a 1/2 inch between the fence and the blade. So let's get that set right now. So as I'm setting up for that 1/2 inch distance between the fence and the blade, with the blade unplugged or the machine unplugged, I'm going to turn and rotate the knife so I have that sharp edge there. And what I'm doing is I'm making sure I have a 1/2 inch material between the fence and the first part of the cutter. We want a 1/2 inch of material left over. We're going to run all three of our pieces, our bottom shelf and our two sides. We're going to make sure our X is orientated along the fence, so I don't see an X on this side, so it's going to be on our other side. We're going to locate our X that we put on there, and we're going to put that against the fence so we make sure we create a right and a left. So let's turn the machine on and get all 3 of these cut. So now before we go over for assembly, let's do one last dry fit, and we're going to put these together and make sure our grooves and everything line up where they should be. Now, we're just putting this together without glue or fasteners, and we're making sure that it fits together, that the groove is all the way along all of those pieces, and we have created a right and a left, not 2 of the same. Now the grain on the bottom shelf should go right and left. Nothing for grain wise on the project is we're going to run front to back. It always goes right and left or up and down. Very, very rarely does it go front to back. So now that everything looks accordingly, we're going to take this over and start getting this glued up. I've got all 5 of my pieces here ready to go. I've got some small scrap blocks on the ground, and I've got some glue here ready to go as well. What we're going to do is get some glue on our pieces, and as that glue is drying, we're going to get it clamped up and ready to go. But I've got these blocks of wood kind of laid on the floor, and I'm going to use those for 2 things. The first thing is to support my workpiece right now so that I'm not setting it on the floor. So as I go to put glue in my workpiece, I can lay my piece on the floor and it's not going to get scratched by any glue or screws or anything that's laying on the floor. So that's going to protect my nice side. Later on, we're going to use those so that our clamps can clamp the workpiece and not damage the veneer. So right now we're going to go ahead and get some glue on this project. I'm going to use just a little bit of glue in the Dados and rabbets. I'm not putting any glue in the back crack right now, just in the shelf dado. We don't want to make a big mess, so it doesn't take a lot. We're just kind of putting a little bead in each rabbet and dado. I'm going to do this on my other side as well. So I got glue in all both of my rabbets and both of my dados. Now we're going to need to assemble. We're going to need to work kind of quickly as we've only got 4 to 5 minutes of open joint time before the glue starts to set and cure. I like to put my project together so the good side is up. So my grooves for my backing are towards the floor. And the reason for that is when we're all done, these joints need to be flush. If these joints are not flush, what's going to happen is my face frame is not going to sit flush on the side of the project. My face frame would have a gap because that's not flush or even. So I'm going to, from the top side where my good face frame is going to be, I can make sure these are nice and even as I clamp. Now we're going to take some of our bar clamps and get them opened up to fit across the project. We're going to try to protect the veneer. The veneer is a thin layer of wood on the plywood, and we're going to protect that so that the veneer does not get damaged from the metal clamps especially if they have some glue on them. So we're going to take some blocks of wood and put those blocks of wood between the clamp jaws, the jaws of the clamp, and then we're going to tighten up the clamp and secure that in place. So I'm right over that shelf with my clamp, so it's not pulling too tight on the top or bottom, and I'm just snugging that up right now. Now I'm going to stand the project up so I don't have to fight gravity, and now I can put my cleats in here without having to hold them and hold a clamp. So remember, my cleats are the 3-inch pieces. I want to make sure there's plenty of glue all the way down here. Take your finger if you need to spread it around a little bit. And we're going to put our cleat in there. And this first cleat is going to come all the way up to the front and be nice and flush with the project. The second cleat is going to go in the back, but we need to be in front of that groove. So we're ready to put our clamp on the top front here, making sure that cleat is flush. And now I'm going to use some blocks again up here to protect my veneer. I'm going to put those against the plywood, and I'm going to pull the clamp in tight. And now I'm going to tighten up that end. Now at this point, if this is sticking out slightly, you could take a mallet against the cleat and push it back and make sure it's pushed down nice and flush to the top. Okay, ours feels pretty good. I'm not too concerned about that. So we're going to tighten it up nice and secure. Now we can go to the clamp just behind there. We're going to go to the other side of the project. So again, as I'm getting this clamp or cleat ready to go, I need to make sure I'm in front of the groove for the backing on both sides. Make sure your distance is the same so that that piece is in there straight on both sides. Okay, when you have it in there, we're going to take our blocks of wood again and protect our veneer. And tighten up the clamp. Okay, and so now our box has one more clamp to go down here on the bottom. So I'm going to roll the project forward so we can put a clamp down here on that shelf. So I'm just going to tip the project forward, set it down gently. I'm going to take my clamp here, open up the jaws, and tighten up these clamps on this joint. Again, I'm using my blocks of wood to help prevent the project from getting scratched up and dented. Again, you'll notice my clamp is right above my shelf so that we're not pulling in and making that those sides curve in as we tighten up too much. So right above the shelf is where the clamp should be. All right, I'm going to flip my project back over so I'm looking at the front side. I'm just going to roll it, stand it up, and set it over. And now we need to check for squareness. So let's get the project realigned here. All right, now we're going to check for squareness. I'm taking my tape measure. I'm going to measure at a diagonal from one corner to the other. And it doesn't matter which way, if I go to the outside corner or the inside corner, as long as I'm measuring the same spot both directions. So I'm going to come right up here to the inside corner, all the way to the far corner here. And I'm at about 26 and 5/8, or 25 and 5/8. We're going to measure the other direction. And we're 26 and about 1/8 by measuring the other direction. So I'm going to put a clamp on the longer side. The clamp is going to squeeze the project in and cause it to straighten up. So my clamp is going on the longer side at a diagonal. Okay, now I'm going to slowly rotate the handle down here, and I have to watch my tape measure. So I know that I was off about about a ½ inch. So I need to move about a ¼ inch. So I'm going to hold my tape measure on the short side. I'm going to slowly rotate the handle of the clamp, and it's not really going to get tight, but the cabinet is going to move as I am rotating that. And I'm going to split the difference so that the two numbers would meet until that is square. So measuring both directions from corner to corner, we should have the exact same size to verify that it is square. You could also take a speed square and check that if you would like, but measuring is going to be the most accurate way. We would then let this dry overnight, or at least an hour if possible. If you don't have the time to put the face frame on, then it will need to just sit here. If you have time in the class or block to now add the face frame, we'll show you how to do that. Okay, this could be 2 separate days. Maybe you glue the box one day and the next day you put the face frame on, or maybe you have it all ready to go and you can do it all in one day. All right, I've set up some sawhorses. We're going to put our project up on top of the sawhorses so that we can run clamps from front to back without hitting the floor. So we're going to raise the project up and set it up here. We're not going to grab the clamps. We don't want the clamps to come off. We're going to actually grab the box or the wood parts and set it up here gently. All right, now that we got our project on the sawhorses and secure, I'm going to need to get this ready. So because we're doing this all in one day, we're going to take this clamp off that was holding our project square. And what we're going to do is use our face frame now to square up the project. So we're going to have to get this clamp out of the way. And this clamp up here in the top is also going to be in the way because when we put the face frame on, we can't set it down flush. So what we're going to need to do is move this clamp, and what I would recommend doing is putting it down here on the end, but we can't tighten it very tight, otherwise we'll start to bend these little ears that are sticking off, these pieces of wood. So we'll loosen the clamp here. I'm going to move it down to the end so it's out of the way, and then tighten it up just gently. I don't want to bend these little tabs here, and so that clamp may just kind of sit there very lightly. It might be kind of loose, but I don't want to crank on it so it bends these in. Now we're going to take some glue and put glue on the surface of the plywood. We want to use just a little amount. We don't want an excessive amount. We don't want it to spill down the side of the project, either inside or outside the project. So I'm going to go around and put a little bead of glue on here. Okay, now I'm going to go through with my finger and kind of smear that around. I don't want that big round bead of glue. I want to control where the excess amount of glue is going in there. If you smear a spot and there's not much glue on there, you can put a little bit more in that section and kind of rub it around. The glue is what's doing the work, so we need the glue to hold the face frame nice and secure. I'm going to come to the other side now, do this shelf. When we're done, we've got glue on our hands. We're not going to have time to run to the sink, get it cleaned off, and come back. So what I would recommend to you is to use the sawhorse, not the top surface that's supporting the workpiece, but the underside. Take your finger, scrape the excess glue off on the underside of the sawhorse so that it's not on the top area that could get onto projects. Okay, now I'm going to take my face frame and very gently set it on the project. trying to kind of keep it even. I don't want to smear the glue around or take excess glue off, but I'm going to get it nice and flush along the top, or even along the top. And then I'm going to make sure I have an overhang on each side. This overhang is not going to be a lot. It's just going to be a little tiny bit, and we're not going to be able to measure it because it's such a small amount. So we're just using our hands to feel that the face frame has a small overhang on the box. Again, just a very small overhang on the box. Once you have this nice and centered on this side, we're not worried about the other side of the project right now, but on this side, we're going to come in and clamp it. We're going to use a wooden twist clamp to clamp the face frame to the top cleat. We're not using a bar clamp right now, because if I were to take a bar clamp from the face frame to the back of the project, I would move that bottom rail because there's nothing in between there. It would just want to slide up. So I am putting the clamp on the top rail and the cleat, the top cleat, and squeezing those tight together. Now that this end is taken care of, we're going to go address the far end of the project and get that lined up. So as I'm down here, we'll notice that the face frame is not even down here. There's a lip there, and on this side, no lip, and the plywood is actually showing. We don't want that. So we're going to have to straighten this up by pushing the face frame over and the box over and squaring those two to each other. So I'm going to get a clamp ready so when I push that over, I can tighten it up. This time I'm going to put my clamp right on the surface, no blocks of wood. And the reason for that is the face frame is solid lumber. We have 7/8 of an inch material to sand and clean this up before we would go through this. So I don't have to protect the solid lumber like I need to on the veneer. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. Now I'm going to push that over to the other side and feel right up here, especially where that shelf is, that face frame has the same overhang. And then I'm going to tighten up that clamp. I don't necessarily want to truss right on the end, because remember that clamp right there could be pulling that sides in. So I want to check right up here where this shelf is and make sure that that is good. Now I'm going to put a clamp on this side. The clamp I have grabbed is a little too long that jaw is not going to hit the wood. If this happens to you, the bar is touching the floor and the jaw is not touching, flip the clamp around and have the excess clamp or bar up in the air. And we're going to put this on and pull this in tight. Okay, so I have kind of my four corners clamped. Now we're going to come and address the middle of the project, and we're feeling that the gap is the same all the way around. I can feel a slight lip here that's bigger than it is on the end. So that means my plywood is bowed in a little bit. So before we put a clamp here, we can push the plywood out so that it's a little bit more uniform of a thickness all the way across. So let's get our clamp in place. And I find it easier to manipulate the plywood from this side. I can really grab that face frame and push with my thumbs and make that even as I feel. So I'm going to push on the plywood with my thumbs, pushing the plywood out so that the distance with the face frame is even. When I feel that it's even, I'm going to tighten up my clamp. So I'm going to push and make sure it's even and tighten my clamp up all at the same time. You may need to have somebody else help you tighten the clamp as you push, especially if you have a big gap that you're trying to change here. Okay, so now that that's nice and even the whole way, we're going to come to the other side and do the same thing. That one feels pretty straight, maybe just ever so slightly a little indent here. So we could pull that out as we put the next clamp on. So again, I'm going to push that plywood out a little bit and then tighten up this clamp all at the same time, looking for a nice even gap the whole way across that face frame and plywood. We're going to come in now that we have the sides secured in the right location, and we're going to add a couple more clamps. Now the extra clamps are going to help pull that face frame down nice and tight to the box and make sure we have a good seal. It might seem like a lot of clamps, but really if we want a nice tight fit, this is what we should be doing, using plenty of clamps to hold it secure. All right, so here we are, all set. We're going to let this sit for at least an hour, again, preferably overnight if possible. Now there may have been a few times where you couldn't get the clamp directly on the project because of the small project. So you can see on this clamp here, it's pulling the face frame down to the project, but if you look underneath, I'm actually clamped to the sawhorse. The sawhorse is pulling the project up, which is pulling it tight into the face frame. That's okay. Also on this last one, we ran out of a little room. We put a clamp there to pull that shelf nice and tight. And you can see down here, we're actually clamped to another clamp. So again, that's okay. We're putting pressure up and pulling this down nice and tight. So for now, this would be a good stopping point for the day. Now, if you have more time left in your class or block time, then you would want to start working on the next portion of the project. And the next portion of the project is going to be the top and the door. We're going to build the top and the door of the project. So we're going to check against the plans, but we're also going to take some measurements here and see how big our things need to be. We're doing a 1/2 inch overlay. That means the door is going to overlay the face frame a 1/2 inch all the way around. So if I take my tape measure and pull this to my opening of my door, I'm at 14.5. So I need to add an inch on for my 1/2 inch overlay. So we're going to be at 15.5. That's how long my pieces need to be. And my door width should be about 10 1/8, adding that inch on, so 10 1/8. All right, now my top is going to have an 1.5 inch overhang on each side. So our project should be 12 inches wide, and we're going to add an 1.5 inches on the right side and the left side. So that's 3 inches total, so that's going to be 15 for a grand total. 12 plus 3 inches is 15. From front to back on this project is 12 inches, and we're going to only add an overhang on the front. This is going to allow the project to sit a little closer to the wall. Now you could put an overhang on the back, and that would give you a little room to run cords and stuff behind your nightstand or end table. That's up to you if you want the overhang on the back. It's a personal preference. So we're going to make this 12 plus 1.5 inches is 13.5. So we're going to take our solid lumber and we're going to work on rough cutting our pieces so that we can go joint them and get them to a straight edge. Over here at the miter saw, again, the sliding miter saw, this is where we're doing our rough cutting. We're going to use the rest of our board up before we take a new one out of the wood rack and write that down. So find the remainder of your board from making our face frame, and that's what we're going to use to start making our top. So I'm going to rough cut off this board. I said I needed to finish at 15.5. That's my finish size. So I'm going to add 2 inches on to get my rough size, and that's 17.5. So I need 2 boards at 17.5 to make my door. So here's my 2 rough cut pieces for my door. I'm going to set those aside, and now I'm going to rough cut 2 pieces for my top. My top was going to be 15 plus 2 inches. That's 17 for our rough cut. So now we're going to take these boards and go get them jointed so they have a straight edge. Put the rest of your wood back in your work storage area. Put your name on there so there's no mistaking whose it is.